Well, let's shift focus now. The Association of Tanzania's Oil and Gas Service Providers is now protesting the European Union Parliament's resolution calling for a halt to the East African crude oil pipeline project. Now, in its September 14th resolution, the EU Parliament took issue with the East Africa crude pipeline on grounds that it will lead to increased carbon emissions. Now, the Tanzania gas providers note that some EU nations are considering reverting to coal, which is a high pollutant, for power generation and therefore lack the moral authority to pour cold water on the $20 billion Uganda-Tanzania project. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with the details.
The East Africa crude oil pipeline is one of the region's most ambitious projects. The 1,449-kilometer oil pipeline will transport oil produced from Uganda's Lake Albert oil fields to the port of Tanga in Tanzania. From there, the oil will then be sold onwards to world markets. But the EU Parliament wants to ban the project, citing human violations, major environmental and climate risks posed by the execution of the project. Abdul Samad Abdurrahim is one of the committee members from the Tanzanian side. He says the EU Parliament is misguided as the appropriate steps have been taken.
The project itself has undergone a number of series of steps. Step number one, to do what we call it pre-feed. Feed design was completed. Environmental social impact was done. Biodiversity was done. Biological survey, baseline, it was done. There were also consultations with locals from the communities where the peasants are, where the pipeline is going to be built, consultation between the locals, the religious and also government, what you call it, consultants, but also what you call regional commissioners and so forth.
The EU Parliament says, along with the climate change risks, more than 100,000 people are being forcefully evicted to make space for the pipeline. Tanzania's energy minister said the overall pipeline route has been designed to minimize environmental and social impacts, and that this collaboration with Uganda is a way to position itself as Africa's oil and gas hotspot.
We have a sufficient resource base to reach that ambition. We have a stable government. We have a president who is keen on energy being at the center of our growth ambition. We are open for business, and we are determined that everybody who is interested in our country, interested to invest in our country, has an opportunity to do so without any encumbrances.
According to ECOP officials, the pipeline represents one of the largest ever inward investments into Uganda and Tanzania, stating that once complete, it could provide over 10,000 jobs and bring millions of dollars for both countries and benefit the wider region.
So we feel that we've been targeted simply because we are going to be transforming our country. This project is supposed to be revolutionize our people, but also economical. We do not want to be dependent on the financial. And we feel that this misinformation is now, there is an agenda behind.
The controversy over this project continues. This week, Total Energies, who is one of the two investors, along with China National Offshore Oil Corporation, was warned by Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni that if its commitment to the project begins to waver, under pressure from the European Union, he will quickly find a new investor. The fate of the oil pipeline project hangs in the balance. In Tanzania, the National Environmental Management Council just revealed that all the environmental steps have indeed been taken. In Uganda, a petition has now been launched denouncing the resolution, while protests have been taking place outside the EU representative office in Kampala. Now, whether the project gets done or not, that decision would impact millions of lives. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, let's now continue that conversation with Abdul Samad Abdul Rahim. Let's remind you, he's a chairman of oil and gas at the Association of Tanzania's Oil and Gas Service Providers. Now, great to have you with us, Mr. Abdul Rahim. And of course, this EU resolution basically condemns this planned pipeline project. And that condemnation has been rejected by the East Africa Commission and also organizations such as the Africa Union. So they're calling it self-serving, and they also say it's an interference in Africa's affairs. But when you look at the EU's concerns, what is the main gist behind them? And do you think the East African community, Uganda and Tanzania specifically, have already addressed these concerns?
Thank you very much for having me tonight. I wish to, first of all, put the record straight. That due to all these, what we call the European members of the Parliament motion, it is very clear that the members of the European Parliament have been well misinformed, and the resolution is based on purely on misinformation and deliberate misperception of key fact and environment, including human rights. We also feel that the EU parliamentary resolution has no standing, but it also, the institution has no legal rights and no legal force on the project participation. There was also very limited efforts of the prior consultation by a very handful members of European Parliament behind the resolution, which is regrettable as they could have avoided manifest errors, such as saying Tanga in Tanzania is a tsunami risk area. They have also manifest to say that Tanzania is covered by water. So this is a very clearly misrepresentation and misinformation. They could have easily have verified the sources and the facts and figures with the project and host government who have been there to really help both international but also the public to educate the information. For instance, there was among the articles that they have written and share and misled the public is that there are more than 100,000 people at imminent risk of displacement. But rather there are only 725 households and roughly around 5,000 people who will be rehoused nearby or even in better conditions. So all this, it's a clearly representation of information. Above all, I wish to say that Tanzania and Uganda are an independent and sovereign states and must be respected as per our Vice President during the United Nations Assembly a few days ago, who addressed the world by saying that we should be allowed to deal with our own and address our own internal process, but must be allowed time to transitioning from a fossil fuel to a renewable. We have our unique development needs and priorities and cannot be preached at the expense of the fossil fuel. But also I wish to mention that this EU member of the Parliament resolution or motion is also clearly against the United Nations Charter, which clearly provides nations such as Tanzania and Uganda the right to self-determination and sovereignty over its natural resources. And when you look at the project itself,
right.
It has done a lot of progress to this date.
Well, sir, we have to acknowledge the fact that while you are correct that the EU has no legal right over the project, the reality is that Total Energies, which owns about 62% of that project, it is a European company and it is facing pressure from the EU with, of course, numerous banks and insurers in the EU now declining to back the pipeline project. So could Total back out of that deal at this stage? And how much would it backing out impact the project going forward?
Yeah, I have to say that I am not a speaker for Total or on behalf of Total or the government. I speak privately and informal capacity as the private sector But as far as we are concerned, and the commitment from Total, and they've said it very clear that it is well aware of the importance of the project to both two countries in terms of the Uganda and Tanzania, and they are committed to carry out all the important elements to ensure that this project carry out an example fashion. And I have to say that environmental and social impact studies have been completed, and Total and EACOP and the partners have also committed to ensure that the human rights and all the activities with human rights are considered in all the activities, including the respect to their workforce, local community, but also the security forces. When you look at the project itself to this date, it has compiled and finished all the international standard, but also intergovernmental agreement has been signed, host government agreement has been signed, final investments, the decision of $3.5 billion have been announced and committed. When you look at the land acquisition, when you look at the land compensation, all have been paid and committed. Even the contractors themselves have already been selected, and the work has already started. So these, what we call it, a noisy people, is just a storm in a teacup.
Well, Mr. Abdul Rahim, will certainly be watching the progress of those discussions. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show and for those great insights. That, of course, is Abdul Samad Abdul Rahim, Chairman of Oil and Gas at the Association of Tanzania Oil and Gas Service Providers in Tanzania.